Welcome to episode 1 of Moby Dick. People talk about having a white whale. This one has definitely been mine. No pun intended, truly. There are only 2 books that I have really stalled on doing on CraftLit. One is Moby Dick. The other, Middlemarch, is in process. It's a ginormous book, and our reader has been working on it, off and on for several years now. Once the book is recorded, we will be doing Middlemarch, I am sure. But that's also one that's a little harder for me to figure out the way in. And Moby Dick does not have a difficult way in, I don't think. So I know I've been putting it off. It's only been 19 years, but I really am very excited to be able to share the book with you. And one of the other reasons why I stalled, I read Moby Dick in grad school, and I think what I wound up doing was ultimately just reading the plot chapters and skipping all of the what size whales are whales chapters, which I think was the right thing for me to do at the time. And I am certainly going to make it possible for you to do that here as well. However, the thing I didn't really realize about Herman Melville, probably because Bartleby the Scrivener, which is not a funny text, was in the textbook that I had in my classroom. We didn't use the textbook very often, but for Bartleby the Scrivener, I did, because I was teaching next door to Trinity Church. My classroom windows, the kids could look out as they were looking at the front of the room. They could also see Trinity Church off to the side. And in Bartleby the Scrivener, which takes place, I think, on Wall Street, after the first page, you turn the page and there is a pen and ink drawing of the view of Trinity Church from Wall Street. And it always made the kids gasp, and so it made it fun. But that short story is not a happy-go-lucky frolic by any means. So that had really colored my memory of Moby Dick. I remembered not disliking it, but I think I was really just too young and didn't have enough context, didn't know enough history to really appreciate what Herman Melville did. I will keep reminding you over and over, this book was written in 1850. This is our Gaskell, our early Dickens, our Bronte sisters, or late Bronte sisters eras in England. This is the beginning of Poe in the United States. We didn't have a lot of literary figures in the United States. Washington Irving had been big for a while now, but really you had the Transcendentalists, you had Hawthorne, and Hawthorne and Melville together, when I was working on my master's in English, were considered anti-transcendentalists. And it made sense at the time because I thought of both of them as being rather gloomy chaps who I wouldn't necessarily want to go have a beer with. And now that I've reread Moby Dick a couple times, I have to say, nothing could be further from the truth. Maybe about Hawthorne. Hawthorne's a whole other tale to tell. Melville is kind of amazing, and you'll see what I mean when we listen to chapter 1, Loomings, Loomings. Loomings, we listened to it together. Because prior to Melville writing Moby Dick, his big opus, and he thought of it as his big opus at the time as well, he knew he was doing something special. Prior to that, he had just gotten on a ship and sailed away into the Pacific, which there's a map that I'm putting in the show notes for you, because when you see what it took to get from England to the Pacific, that was a major commitment. You were not going to see home for 2, maybe 3 years. Sometimes some whaling boats, according to what I have read, I do not know that if this is absolutely true, some whaling ships were out for 5 years, and most of that time was spent on the water. You didn't spend a whole lot of time like port hopping. But Melville went out, decided he didn't like the ship he was on very much, so he and a friend absconded themselves and wound up on an island that, the white folks said it was full of cannibals. And so they were absolutely expecting to be eaten every day. It's kind of like The Princess Bride, where the dread pirate Robert said, it's a shame I'll have to kill you in the morning. And then every morning he doesn't kill Wesley. They were so well treated by the natives on that island. And you will absolutely hear the remnants of that experience within the first 4 chapters of this book all over the place. But he really had a lovely time. And eventually they got on another ship. And I think he did 2 more ship hops before he got on the ship that was coming back home. But either way, he had a real adventure. Like, he got to learn the language. He lived there long enough amongst people who he had exactly 0 in common with, beside the fact that they drink water and breathe air and have to obey the law of gravity. He had this amazing experience. He comes back with it, and it is very Plato's Cave. He is an absolutely changed man, and the only way he can deal with it is to write about this experience. So he does. In 1846, he writes the book Typee, Typee, and then the subtitle is A Peep at Polynesian Life, which I love. And that was an enormous bestseller. It was published in America. It was published overseas. It made his career, Typee. And then in 1847, so a year later, he writes Omoo, O-M-O-O. And then the subtitle of that is A Narrative of Adventures in the South Seas, which also did well, but not as well as Typee. Typee is also very, very funny, which is not surprising. Third book, 1849, Mardi, M-A-R-D-I, which is called And a Voyage Thither, did not do as well. Then 1849, Redburn, subtitle His First Voyage, also did not do as well. White Jacket, or The World in a Man o' War, 1850, also did not do so well. Typee was really the big one. And then 1851. So during 1850, he's writing it. 1851, Moby Dick, or The Whale, comes out. This was a very frustrating time for him with the early success of Typee and then the gradual thinning of his literary name and his ability to provide for his family because he was writing full time. It made it very difficult for him. And they moved out of the city. They were up in the Berkshires, not far from where Nathaniel Hawthorne had a place. That's a whole story we will share during chapter 4. Melville is a man possessed. He is writing so hard. I mean, really, it's like he's treating it like he needs to get in shape to play Captain America, kind of working hard. It's relentless. He has all of this in his mind. He has every book he's ever read in his head and available. And right now we're doing Elizabeth Gaskell's Cranford on the regular podcast. And Elizabeth Gaskell had a lot in her head, but she was constantly kind of semi-quoting or sort of misquoting, depending on which way you're looking at it. All of these other texts, whether it's Spenser's Faerie Queene or Shakespeare's Hamlet, she's got it in there too. The difference is Melville seems to have it down by heart. And if he doesn't try to quote it. He gives you these beautiful, graceful, poetical allusions that make you go, oh, I bet I know what he's talking about. And you are correct. I guarantee you, if you think he's actually sub-referencing something else, I am willing to guarantee that you are correct. So he is throwing everything he can at this book, and he's exhausting himself, and there's something up with his eyesight because he's giving himself massive headaches. And so he'll write as far as he can through these headaches. And of course, he's doing this all with a quill pen on top of everything else. It's not like there's an efficient way for him to write. It's all longhand and it's all ink. And then he finishes it. And he is happy with the book. He knows what he has done is extraordinary, and it doesn't sell, which just breaks my heart. Every time we come across an author who has put their blood, sweat, tears, heart, and soul into writing a book that we now see as being a staggering work of heartbreaking genius, and it didn't do well at the time, it just kills me. I feel so heartbroken for the writer, but particularly in Melville's case, there's so much stuff. I feel like Inigo Montoya, no, it's too much. I sum up. Melville was out of his time. He was very much a man of his time. I mean, like the ship world, the mariner life, that was obviously of a time. The whaling industry, obviously of a time. But he himself really didn't fit. So the important things to keep in mind. People have a lot of preconceived notions about Melville, and it is going to be my life's work to disabuse people of these notions, because he is not the dour, dark Nathaniel Hawthorne anti-transcendentalist type. He is dark, sure, because other characters are dark. His stand-in is not. So the view through which we see the narrative unfold is not that of a dark. He's not looking through a glass darkly. And more importantly, because of his history, because he spent so much time sailing around the Pacific and jumping onto islands and just living with natives, he is actively anti-racist, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial. And he's one who only wants to work before the mast. That means normal sailor, in front of the mast, not in the back where the rudder is and the wheel is and all the fancy schmancy people with the hats on are. He just wants to work, make sure the ropes are under control, make sure the rigging is as it should be, make sure the sails are doing as they should, make sure that if he has crow's nest duty, he scrambles up on time. That's all he wants to do. He is so anti-elitist and anti-elite, and yet he's also incredibly well-read, and he sub-references everything. But again, on the ship, there is going to be downtime when you're in the middle of the ocean, so reading is definitely something to do. What's everybody going to have access to a copy of? A Bible. Dude knows his Bible. So I think he gets unfairly pigeonholed as being kind of Hawthorne-like because they were very close friends, and because Hawthorne can be so very dark. But Melville is not. He is not. That is a hill I will fight on. He'll probably die there too, but I'm willing to make that fight part of my future because it's worth it. So unlike more modern stories, and by modern I mean really within the last 20 years, 25 years, this does not start in media res. This does not start in the middle of things. It begins in the beginning. And our first chapter, Loomings, is named beautifully because our main character is in a rough patch. He's depressed. He's unhappy. He's been on the land too long. And in this first chapter, he's going to explain that to us, and he's going to explain it to us in some very funny ways, but also some very serious ways where I at least went, oh yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, some of his language is kind of archaic, but I mean, that's to be expected. It's 1850, 1851, so duh. But specific things you need to know before we dive into what is a not very long chapter. That's the other thing about Moby Dick that's really weird. Some chapters are not even a full page, and some chapters are many, many pages. So there's variety. Chapter 1 is not particularly long by any stretch. But to begin at the beginning, "Call me Ishmael" is the very famous first line. And I think often people misunderstand or just don't know why that would matter. And the reason it would matter is because Ishmael is a biblical name, and it goes back to the biblical story of Abraham. He and his wife Sarah were unable to have children because God was mucking around with things. And so Abraham, you need to have an heir so that you can pass your things on to that heir. So he winds up bedding down with his bondservant, Hagar. Interestingly, there are not a lot of women outside of the matriarchs, Sarah, Rachel, Leah, that group. There are not many women who have names. Hagar is named, which puts her way ahead of the pack. Moses' sister is named. More will come to me as we go. But Hagar is important because Hagar winds up being the mother of Ishmael, and everything is looking very, very good for Ishmael and Hagar. And then Sarah gets pregnant, finally, and gives birth to Isaac. Isaac being the son of Abraham and his actual wife. Isaac is going to inherit everything. Ishmael gets banished with his mother. This becomes important because, as far as my understanding goes, the tribe that Ishmael sires when he and his mother Hagar go off becomes the lineage to Muhammad. So my understanding is Muslims trace themselves back to the same patriarch that the Jews trace themselves to. Everybody goes back to Abraham. So it's not accidental that the very first words out of our narrator's mouth, it is not, "My name is Ishmael." It is, "Call me Ishmael." He does get called Ishmael all throughout this. He even calls himself Ishmael throughout this. But that is clearly not his given name. Instead, he wants us to associate him with the outcast, with the forgotten, with the one who doesn't fit. So before we get past the third word, we already know a lot about our narrator, which is great. He will mention that he likes to do something to drive off the spleen. The spleen is like bad temper or ill humor. It can also be melancholy or low spirits. And I think in this case, it's probably bad-tempered melancholy that he's wrestling with. He will also mention, especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me. Hypos are hypochondriacal instincts. Like when you start to think you're sick, oh my God, I'm tired, I've got lupus. That's a house reference. That kind of thing is going on in his head. And then he makes another comparison. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. Cato, Cato, is a famous Stoic philosopher and massive defender of the Roman Republic. And he was one of Julius Caesar's big antagonists. So Cato throwing himself upon his sword, committing suicide, he says, instead of doing what Cato does, throwing himself on a sword and killing himself, he'll take to a ship. So Ishmael makes it very clear just how close he got, but that unlike this fabulous Stoic philosopher, he is not going to kill himself. He's just going to go out on the ocean. He calls the island of Manhattan the city of the Manhattoes. The city of Manhattoes. That's a sub-reference to Sleepy Hollow, to Knickerbocker's History of New York from Washington Irving. And it also kind of predates Whitman in my head. There's a lot of language that I think Whitman must have read Moby Dick 100 times, because now I'm seeing a lot of connections between the two of them, which I absolutely would not have seen when I read this the first time when I was in grad school. He talks about the Battery. Downtown is the Battery. The Bronx is up and the Battery's down. I have in the show notes, I have a couple of maps for you because he gets pretty specific. The Battery is the very southern tip of Manhattan. This is where, in fact, where my school evacuated to when we got hit on 9/11. We went to Battery Park. We could only go south, and it's a big open space, and that felt very safe. And on one of these maps that you'll see, you will see a round structure down at the Battery, and that's Castle Clinton. We now still call it Castle Clinton. It was renamed several times, but it started as Castle Clinton. It was one of the forts that was put in place to defend the city of New York during the Revolutionary War. Then he talks about walking around the city and going from Corlear's Hook to Kenty's Slip. And that's Corlears, Corlear's Hook. And Kenty's Slip is Coenties. These are actually marked on the second map that I saw. They are on the east side, kind of near where the Williamsburg Bridge is now. It would be going from that area of the city down to the Battery and then up Whitehall Street, which is also still there. And that would lead you to the Hudson River, where you would see more ocean-going crafts. The East River had to be dredged. It's not really a river. So you weren't going to see the big ships necessarily on the East River side, but on the Hudson is a massive river. It flows straight out to the ocean. It's tidal, so when the tide comes in, salt water moves up the Hudson River, and when the tide goes out, the fresh water takes over, which is kind of an interesting tidal flow to be at that kind of pivot point in New York, but that's just another weird thing about New York. He talks about people leaning against spiles. These are big wooden stakes that are placed on the wharf. You could tie a boat to them. You could also lean on them. You could use them as fence posts. You could do a whole lot of things. They are still there. There are still spiles down at the Battery. In fact, on 9/11, I wound up sitting down below next to one. It felt very safe being down there and protected by this giant big hunk of wood. I know it wouldn't have been any use had the building fallen on us, but it felt good at the time. So you've got these spiles. Then he makes a kind of a funky sub-reference where he's talking about water again, all sorts of different kinds of water, and that if you're in the desert and you happen to be supplied with a metaphysical professor, he's talking about specifically not just somebody who's like crystal ball gazing. He's talking about somebody who knows how to do divining with a divining rod, to use a divining rod to find water. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I will link out to information in the show notes. Divining has a really interesting history in the United States. Yeah, it's not a huge surprise that him being a New Englander would have sub-referenced that activity. He talks about something being dreamy, shady, quiet, enchanting, romantic in all the valley of the Saco. And I hope I am pronouncing it right. I have never been there. But SACO is the Saco River. It moves from southern Maine into New Hampshire and then into the ocean. If it is not pronounced Saco, please let me know. And just because this is premium audio doesn't mean you can't call 206-350-1642 and share your thoughts when we will share them with everybody else. There's going to be a reference, and it's going to sound like a very specific reference. Why did the poor poet of Tennessee, upon suddenly receiving 2 handfuls of silver, ... and then it turns into a joke. And I'm like, wow, who is the poor poet of Tennessee? It turns out the poor poet of Tennessee is actually like Florida man for us today. It's a rube. It's a generic term. And of course, this became much more nastily localized in people's countries of origin. So you'd have Irish jokes, you'd have Polish jokes, you know what I'm saying? You have Jewish jokes at the expense of those people. Before that, apparently Tennessee gets hit. So the poor poet of Tennessee is just Florida man. He mentions the Greeks having a separate deity and brother of Jove. This is Poseidon. He's still talking about water. Why is water so important? Well, it's been really important for a long time. The Greeks even gave water their own god, its own god. And not just a god, but Zeus's brother. So big. And then Narcissus, the story of Narcissus, he was the really hot youth who saw himself reflected in a pool of water, and fell so in love with himself that he couldn't get up, he couldn't move. He just sat there pining away, looking at himself in all of his beauteousness, and died. And because Greeks were, real happy for people who were gorgeous, they felt bad for him, apparently, and turned him into the Narcissus flower. So again, it's just another story that is connected with water in some way, because Melville is just going to hit us with all of them. He will say at one point he is something of a salt. A salt is somebody who's been a sailor for a long time or been at sea a lot. So unsurprisingly, one of the other things that's going to happen as we read the book, we're not going to get an exposition dump of this. It's going to be woven in throughout the book. I've already mentioned before the mast, the people who were just sailors who worked in the front part and really, honestly, probably never left the front part of the ship, because that's also where their hammocks were downstairs, where they'd bunk in, all of that. So he talks about going to sea as a simple sailor right before the mast, plumb down into the forecastle, which is spelled forecastle, Forecastle, but it's pronounced forecastle, and aloft there to the royal masthead. So the royal masthead is the highest part of a square-rigged sailing ship's mast. So we will get into more about masts and everything, but the important thing is it's the highest point. And not all ships had royal masts. Only the larger or particularly faster vessels like clippers and warships, the highest accessible point a sailor might climb to during watch duty, let them perch hundreds of feet above the deck, often alone and often exposed to weather. And we're going to see a lot more of that in chapter 35. Then he mentions a spar. A spar is a long, round piece of wood or metal used on a ship to support sails, rigging, or flags. So you have masts, that would be a vertical spar, but then you also have yards, the horizontal spars that square sails are hung off of. You have many other kinds of spars that we will get into as we go through the book. He will mention the Van Rensselaers, the Randolphs, and the Hardicanutes. And this is very much a Washington Irving moment. The Van Rensselaers are one of the oldest and wealthiest Dutch colonial families in New York. So they're like old Dutch American aristocracy. The Randolphs were a prominent Virginia family dating back to colonial times, related to Thomas Jefferson. His mother was a Randolph. And they would have been referenced here as your Southern aristocracy or gentry. The Hardicanutes are a reference to a Danish king of England in the early 11th century, son of the King Canute, the one King Canute who commanded the tide. So that's giving you've got your northern aristocracy, your southern aristocracy, and now you get this kind of semi-mythic medieval nobility. So it's Melville as Ishmael trying to sound like, yeah, we know old established families. We know what actual historical importance means when it comes to family names. He also makes a joke, and if you keep Ichabod Crane in your mind, it will ring perfect, that it's hard to go from being a schoolmaster in your real life, where that's assumed to be a position of relative respect, unless you're Ichabod Crane. It's hard to go from that to being a sailor, before the mast sailor, where you are told what to do all the time, and And that's a rough transition. And he says you would need a strong decoction of Seneca and the Stoics to enable you to grin and bear it. The Stoics being, and Seneca being one of them, the people who are like, this is what's in front of us. This is what we have to deal with. We must deal with it. The end. I'm going to link out in the show notes to a video that Aaron actually sent me for YouTubers who went on a frigate that a crazy man, I don't know his history at all, but he's marvelous. He sounds Slavic. I don't know if he's Czech or if he's Ukrainian. I don't know where he's from. Somebody will be able to tell me. But he built this frigate. Like, he has tons of money. What does he do with it? He builds a frigate. And now he's using it as a floating school to teach people how these ships worked, because they're brilliant. They are just enormous floating lessons in efficiency. But there is one YouTuber out of the 4 who absolutely cannot deal with being told to do things. He is so used to being the master of his own domain that he is just not happy until the very end, which is really funny. But it is fascinating to watch because it is exactly what Melville is talking about here. He talks about something being the universal thump being passed around. This group thumps that group puts down that group puts down this other group puts down the first group, and thus the universal thump is passed around, which sounds so Whitman to me. I love it. The universal thump has been in my mind of late. It seems too perfect. He refers to Adam and Eve as the 2 orchard thieves, which I just love. And then he has a whole paragraph where he talks about how marvelous it is to work before the mast because you get the freshest air in your face. And that the captains and the officers, they all think they're getting fresh air, but they're actually getting their atmosphere secondhand from the sailors on the forecastle. And he mentions as part of this that you should never violate the Pythagorean maxim. And I was like, what Pythagorean? I mean, how does a hypotenuse come into play? I mean, I guess maybe it could. I could not figure this out. I had to go look this up. Pythagoras, among other things, was very anti-bean. I'm not kidding. He believed that we shouldn't eat beans. For other reasons too, but also because of flatulence. So, but the Pythagorean maxim is don't eat beans because you know what will happen. And Melville is telling us that it is important to know this if you are working before the mast, because anything you emit will get passed back to the officers on the aft decks. And yeah, Melville's making fart jokes. Yes, he is. But he's doing it in the nicest way possible. He's good. He talks about the invisible police officer of the Fates. The Fates are the 3 goddesses who control all of human destiny and life. Clotho is the one who spins the thread of life. Lachesis is the one who determines the length, and Atropos cuts it off. And those are the Fates. They show up everywhere all the time. Percy Jackson has the Fates. It's all, everybody brings them up at some point. So does Melville. He also makes a joke at his own expense about how he has spent all this time going on about how important it is for him to go to sea. And he says, but actually, it's probably not that important that Ishmael goes to sea. In fact, if you were to read headlines, a posted bill, headlines of the day, it would say in all caps, grand contested election for the presidency of the United States. Whaling voyage by one Ishmael. Bloody battle in Afghanistan. And it is true. The Zachary Taylor presidential election, it wasn't so much that it was contested, like they had to do recounts, but it was that it was at a very contentious period in American history. In the post-Mexican-American War, there were lots of states that were getting added, and of course the southern states were very concerned that this not throw the balance off as far as slave-owning states and non-slave-owning states. So it was a fraught time in the presidency, and who won was going to have a lot to do with how this all got parsed out. As far as Afghanistan goes, it brings me right back to the Merry Minuet by the Kingston Trio, which begins their rioting in Africa. You know what? I'll just find a copy of it and I'll play it at the end so you can hear it, because nothing ever changes. Bloody battle in Afghanistan. The first Anglo-Afghan War was from 1839 to 1842. It was a huge disaster for the British. They had a puppet ruler that they had tried to put in. That didn't work. They tried to take Kabul. That didn't work. And only one British survivor was allowed to leave, Dr. William Bryson, apparently because they liked him a lot. And they said, okay, we're going to spare you so you can run to Jalalabad and tell all of your friends what happened here so they will leave us alone. Which is in fact what happened, although I don't think anybody listened to him about the leave us alone part. So yeah, 1851, we had a big presidential kerfuffle in that election, and we had fighting in Afghanistan. So there is that. So he does drop the fact, which should seem obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. He says, yet now that I recall all the circumstances, ... That is letting us know for absolute certain that A, everything that we're about to read happened to Ishmael, our putative narrator, and B, that it's all done. He's not telling us the story as it happens to him. He's telling it like he is there as it's happening to him. But when he is writing this down for us, everything has already happened. He has a moment where he talks about being cajoled into the delusion that it was a choice resulting from my own unbiased free will and discriminating judgment. So my first question was, was he Calvinist? Was he into predestination? What's going on? And the answer is that's what he was raised with. His mother was Dutch Reformed, Maria Gansvoort. She was devoutly Calvinist, so it was big on original sin, depravity, predestination, God's absolute sovereignty. So Melville wound up, not surprisingly, wrestling with those big ideas all of his life. Hawthorne did too, although he was more kind of actively pushing back against it and focused more on kind of shame and secrecy and spiritual inheritance. You can kind of see Jonathan Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God emphasis or bias in Hawthorne's writing, whereas Melville really just does seem to be wrestling with is there free will? How much of our destinies are predetermined? And not always predetermined by God, but are they predetermined because of our own moral, emotional, philosophical failings? That we put ourselves on a track. And unless we examine those things, unless we doubt those things, unless we question those things, we will inevitably run into the thing that we're destined because of all of these things to run into, not necessarily because of God. And that's going to become a huge question as we go along with this, both with Ishmael and with Ahab. So at the very, very end of today's chapter, he is going to talk about the whales being portentous and mysterious monsters. I want to make this very clear now because it's going to take us a while to get to the chapter where this actually kicks in. He calls the whales monsters because they're huge. He calls them leviathans because that's biblical and poetic and they are enormous. He will call them beasts because they can't speak the way we can. However, the same thing is going to happen when he talks about people from the South Pacific, from the Pacific Islands. He is going to call them cannibals and savages. Never forget that Melville lived among people who were supposed to be cannibals, according to all the scuttlebutt that he'd heard. He never saw them eat a person. He was never served human meat. He was never threatened. He knows very well that these people are not cannibals. And he knows very well that they are not savages. But the language that was being used at the time was the language that was being used at the time. You will see him pushing back against that language, even though he's using it. You will see him pushing back against that language all throughout this book. So I was very concerned reading it again, reading it now, that there was going to be kind of a bloodthirsty element to the whaling industry. And there are definitely moments where everybody gets swept up in the adrenaline of what they're doing, like any human would. There's the horror of the moment, but also, this huge adrenaline rush when you're trying to fight something that is so many times larger than you and your little boat. So one of the reasons why I said earlier that I think I was wrong to skip a lot of the whale chapters, the whale specific chapters, the cetology chapters and the ambergris chapters and stuff, is because I think it is in those chapters that we learn how much respect Melville has for these extraordinary animals. And not just respect for, but a real genuine love. It's almost like adoration of these animals. And you go, well, then how could he go out on a whaling ship and kill them? And he does explain what was going on financially and necessity in the world. There was no part of the whale that was wasted. We've lost a lot of that in our modern world. There's a lot of cow parts and chicken parts and things like that that get wasted these days. I don't know if we'll be able to afford to continue those practices, but if Melville had been in a society and a culture where it would have been appropriate for him to say a prayer of thanks to the animal who was going to provide light and sustenance and it's a whole laundry list of things. He makes it very clear. He would have been doing that. He has a very, very complicated relationship with the whales. But it is not one... It's like calling Frankenstein's monster a monster. I always prefer calling him a creature because he has been created, but Victor's the monster. So calling the whale a monster, there are other people, not Ishmael, who are monstrous in their attitudes about whales. Ishmael is not one of them. Melville is not one of them. You'll see it all over here. And actually, in fact, along with the monster thing, he's going to talk about forbidden seas and landing on barbarous coasts. Again, it's the savages are not savages to him. The barbarians are not barbarians to him. He doesn't actually think any of these places people are barbarians. He is using the heightened poetic language of the day to communicate to people who probably wouldn't trust him a whole lot as a narrator if he didn't use that terminology, because he is very, very quickly, like within the first 4 chapters, going to come directly at them for thinking that way and turn it all on its ear and make it very, very clear that you can use those words all you want, but you're wrong. So you just have to keep that in mind. If it is something that you find affronting in these old books, that kind of language, it'll be okay. I promise. And I think that is it. All right. I am now going to play you. That was a lot of information before a not very long chapter. I have a couple things to bring up at the end after you've listened, but for now, let's go listen to Chapter 1, Loomings, from Moby Dick, or The Whale, by Herman Melville. Here we go.
Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Narrated by B.J. Harrison. Inscription. In token of my admiration for his genius, this book is inscribed to Nathaniel Hawthorne. Chapter 1. Loomings. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, some time or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. There now is your insular city of the Manhattoes, belted round by wharves as Indian isles by coral reefs. Commerce surrounds it with her surf. Right and left, the streets take you waterward. Its extreme downtown is the Battery, where that noble mole is washed by waves and cooled by breezes, which a few hours previous were out of sight of land. Look at the crowds of water-gazers there. Circumambulate the city of a dreamy Sabbath afternoon. Go from Corlear's Hook to Coenties Slip, and from thence by Whitehall northward. What do you see? Posted like silent sentinels all around the town stand thousands upon thousands of mortal men fixed in ocean reveries, some leaning against the spiles, some seated upon the pierheads, some looking over the bulwarks of ships from China, some high aloft in the rigging, as if striving to get a still better seaward peep. But these are all landsmen, of weekdays pent up in lath and plaster, tied to counters, nailed to benches, clinched to desks. How then is this? Are the green fields gone? What do they here? But look, here come more crowds, pacing straight for the water and seemingly bound for a dive. Strange. Nothing will content them but the extremest limit of the land. Loitering under the shady lee of yonder warehouses will not suffice, no. They must get just as nigh the water as they possibly can without falling in. And there they stand, miles of them, leagues. Inlanders all, they come from lanes and alleys, streets and avenues, north, east, south, and west. Yet here they all unite. Tell me, does the magnetic virtue of the needles of the compasses of all those ships attract them thither? Once more, say you are in the country, in some high land of lakes. Take almost any path you please, and 10 to 1 it carries you down in a dale and leaves you there by a pool in the stream. There is magic in it. Let the most absent-minded of men be plunged in his deepest reveries. Stand that man on his legs, set his feet a-going, and he will infallibly lead you to water, if water there be in all that region. Should you ever be athirst in the great American desert, try this experiment if your caravan happen to be supplied with a metaphysical professor. Yes, as everyone knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. But here is an artist. He desires to paint you the dreamiest, shadiest, quietest, most enchanting bit of romantic landscape in all the valley of the Saco. What is the chief element he employs? There stand his trees, each with a hollow trunk, as if a hermit and a crucifix were within. And here sleeps his meadow, and there sleep his cattle, and up from yonder cottage goes a sleepy smoke. Deep into distant woodlands winds a mazy way, reaching to overlapping spurs of mountains bathed in their hillside blue. But though the picture lies thus tranced, and though this pine tree shakes down its sighs like leaves upon this shepherd's head, yet all were vain, unless the shepherd's eye were fixed upon the magic stream before him. Go visit the prairies in June, when for scores on scores of miles you wade knee-deep among tiger lilies. What is the one charm wanting? Water! There was not a drop of water there. Were Niagara but a cataract of sand, would you travel your 1,000 miles to see it? Why did the poor poet of Tennessee, upon receiving 2 handfuls of silver, deliberate whether to buy him a coat, which he sadly needed, or invest his money in a pedestrian trip to Rockaway Beach? Why is almost every robust, healthy boy with a robust, healthy soul in him, at some time or other, crazy to go to sea? Why, upon your first voyage as a passenger, did you yourself feel such a mystical vibration, when first told that you and your ship were now out of sight of land? Why did the old Persians hold the sea holy? Why did the Greeks give it a separate deity, and own brother of Job? Surely all this is not without meaning. And still deeper, the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all. Now, when I say that I am in the habit of going to sea whenever I begin to grow hazy about the eyes, and begin to be overconscious of my lungs, I do not mean to have it inferred that I ever go to sea as a passenger. For to go as a passenger, you must needs have a purse, and a purse is but a rag unless you have something in it. Besides, passengers get seasick, grow quarrelsome, don't sleep of nights, do not enjoy themselves much as a general thing. No, I never go as a passenger. Nor, though I am something of a salt, do I ever go to sea as a commodore, or a captain, or a cook. I abandon the glory and distinction of such offices to those who like them. For my part, I abominate all honorable, respectable toils, trials, and tribulations of every kind whatever. It is quite as much as I can do to take care of myself, without taking care of ships, barks, brigs, schooners, and what not. And as for going as cook, though I confess there is considerable glory in that, a cook being a sort of officer on shipboard, yet somehow I never fancied broiling fowls, though once broiled, judiciously buttered, and judgmatically salted and peppered, there is no one who will speak more respectfully, not to say reverentially, of a broiled fowl than I will. It is out of the idolatrous dotings of the old Egyptians upon broiled ibis and roasted river horse that you see the mummies of those creatures in their huge bake-houses, the pyramids. No. When I go to sea, I go as a simple sailor, right before the mast, plumb down into the forecastle, aloft there to the royal masthead. True, they rather order me about some, and make me jump from spar to spar, like a grasshopper in a May meadow. And at first this sort of thing is unpleasant enough. It touches one's sense of honor, particularly if you come from an old-established family in the land, the Van Rensselaers, or Randolphs, or Hardicanutes. And more than all, if just previous to putting your hand into the tar-pot, you have been lording it as a country schoolmaster, making the tallest boys stand in awe of you. The transition is a keen one, I assure you, from a schoolmaster to a sailor, and requires a strong decoction of Seneca and the Stoics to enable you to grin and bear it. But even this wears off in time. What of it if some old hunks of a sea captain orders me to get a broom and sweep down the decks? What does that indignity amount to, weighed, I mean, in the scales of the New Testament? Do you think the Archangel Gabriel thinks anything the less of me, because I promptly and respectfully obey that old hunks in that particular instance? Who ain't a slave? Tell me that. Well, then, however the old sea captains may order me about, however they may thump and punch me about, I have the satisfaction of knowing that it is all right, that everybody else is, one way or other, served in much the same way, either in a physical or metaphysical point of view, that is. And so the universal thump is passed round, and all hands should rub each other's shoulder blades and be content. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor, because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas they never pay passengers a single penny that I ever heard of. On the contrary, passengers themselves must pay. And there is all the difference in the world between paying and being paid. The act of paying is perhaps the most uncomfortable infliction that the two orchard thieves entailed upon us. But being paid, what will compare with it? The urbane activity with which a man receives money is really marvelous, considering that we so earnestly believe money to be the root of all earthly ills, and that on no account can a moneyed man enter heaven. How cheerfully we consign ourselves to perdition. Finally, I always go to sea as a sailor, because of the wholesome exercise and pure air of the forecastle deck. For as in this world, headwinds are far more prevalent than winds from astern, that is, if you never violate the Pythagorean maxim, so, for the most part, the Commodore on the quarter-deck gets his atmosphere at second hand from the sailors on the forecastle. He thinks he breathes it first, but not so. In much the same way do the commonalty lead their leaders in many other things, at the same time that the leaders little suspect it. But wherefore it was that, after having repeatedly smelt the sea as a merchant sailor, I should now take it into my head to go on a whaling voyage. This, the invisible police officer of the fates, who has the constant surveillance of me and secretly dogs me and influences me in some unaccountable way, he can better answer than anyone else. And doubtless, my going on this whaling voyage formed part of the grand program of Providence that was drawn up a long time ago. It came in as a sort of brief interlude and solo between more extensive performances. I take it that this part of the bill must have run something like this: Grand contested election for the presidency of the United States. Whaling voyage by one Ishmael. Bloody battle in Afghanistan. Though I cannot tell why it was exactly that those stage managers, the fates, put me down for this shabby part of a whaling voyage, when others were set down for magnificent parts in high tragedies, and short and easy parts in genteel comedies, and jolly parts in farces, though I cannot tell why this was exactly. Yet now that I recall all the circumstances, I think I can see a little into the springs and motives which, being cunningly presented to me under various disguises, induced me to set about performing the part I did, besides cajoling me into the delusion that it was a choice resulting from my own unbiased free will and discriminating judgment. Chief among these motives was the overwhelming idea of the great whale himself. Such a portentous and mysterious monster roused all my curiosity. Then the wild and distant seas where he rolled his island bulk, the undeliverable, nameless perils of the whale, these, with all the attending marvels of 1,000 Patagonian sights and sounds, helped to sway me to my wish. With other men, perhaps, such things would not have been inducements, but as for me, I am tormented with an everlasting itch for things remote. I love to sail forbidden seas and land on barbarous coasts. Not ignoring what is good, I am quick to perceive a horror, and could still be social with it, would they let me, since it is but well to be on friendly terms with all the inmates of the place one lodges in. By reason of these things, then, the whaling voyage was welcome. The great floodgates of the wonder world swung open, and, in the wild conceits that swayed me to my purpose, 2 and 3 there floated into my inmost soul, endless processions of the whale, and midmost of them all, one grand, hooded phantom, like a snow hill in the air.
All right. So going back to the beginning of this chapter, I love the vision he brings whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul. Whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off. I'm like, oh my gosh, who hasn't felt like this at some point in life? This is so, the damp, drizzly November in my soul. Right? I'm not crazy, right? That is just fantastic writing. Love it. Love it. Love him. It's all good. I loved that opening paragraph. It's kind of like the opening to Cranford. It is a perfect opening paragraph to give you everything you kind of need to know for the tone. So good. I also loved, I loved I can't go to sea as a passenger. For to go as a passenger, you must needs have a purse, and a purse is but a rag unless you have something inside it. It's not going to do you much good to have a purse if there's no money in the purse. And then, besides, passengers get seasick, grow quarrelsome, don't sleep at nights, do not enjoy themselves much as a general thing. No, I never go as a passenger. And also, I never go to sea as a commodore or a captain or a cook. I abandon the glory and distinction of such offices to those who like them. For my part, I abominate all honorable, respectable toils, trials, and tribulations of every kind whatsoever. And again, it just screams proto-Whitman to me, that idea of abominating all honorable, respectable toils, trials, tribulations. It's so good. I also thought it was kind of funny where he was talking about, I never fancied broiling fowls, and then he ends with, it is out of the idolatrous dotings of the old Egyptians upon broiled ibis and roasted river horse that you see the mummies of those creatures in their huge bake houses. Like the pyramids itself in such a hot climate were the thing that actually mummified, baked the Egyptians, which I suppose is kind of true. It's a dry climate, and that helped the mummification process, but I thought it was interesting. I also loved towards the end, I love to sail forbidden seas and land on barbarous coasts. Not ignoring what is good, I am quick to perceive a horror, and could still be social with it, would they let me, since it is but well to be on friendly terms with all the inmates of a place one lodges in. I recognize horror when I see it. I can still get along with whatever that horror is if they'll let me. Because, don't poke the animals. If you're stuck living with crazy people, you better learn how to live with crazy people in some amount of harmony. And so, by reason of those things, then the whaling voyage was welcome. And in the wild conceits that swayed me to my purpose, 2 and 2 there floated into my inmost soul endless processions of the whale, and midmost of them all, one grand, hooded phantom, like a snow hill in the air. And that is our white whale. And that is where we're going to end. All right, I hope you enjoyed Chapter 1 of Moby Dick. I hope that you are not afraid of Moby Dick. I hope that you are excited to read more, because the opening of this book, the first 4 or 5 chapters of this book are just staggeringly well written. And I am so excited to be able to bring you the next chapter next week.